What's going on, guys? Today we're going to do a car review between two very sought after cars. We have the 2018 Subaru WRX STI and we have the 2017 Ford Focus RS. Both are all-wheel drive, both are 4-cylinder turbocharged engines, and both are 6-speed manual transmissions. So I have a pretty good perspective on both of these cars because they both happen to be mine. And I've been able to drive both of them for the last few months or so, and I can give you guys some good details on what it's like to daily drive both of these cars, what I like about each one, and what I dislike about each one. Let's start with the aesthetics and the overall look of the car, and then we'll talk about drivability and everything else on the inside. So the first thing that I can mention to you about the appearance of each car is that they both look phenomenal. Ford did an excellent job with the RS, and Subaru did an excellent job with the STI. Now, if I had to pick one that I think looks better, I would have to go with the Subaru WRX STI, but that might be a biased opinion because I've been a Subaru fanatic since I was like 12 years old. That being said, when I take both of these cars out, kids and people are always coming up to me and asking questions. They both have the elements necessary to make a car look special. When you look at each one of these cars, you can tell that must be some sort of special factory model or some type of race car, if you will, whatever. Even people who know nothing about cars come up to me and ask about the cars. So that's got to say something to the credit of Subaru and Ford, because they did a great job making the cars look and feel like something special. So the first thing we notice when we're looking at the 2018 WRX STI as opposed to the other ones is the all-new front fascia. If you see here, they put that black plastic piece in the middle, which some people actually complain about, but I actually think it looks really nice. And owning these cars day to day and having owned a 2016 WRX in the same color, I can tell you that I like it because when you hit bugs on the highway, it doesn't peel your paint. That sounds like something weird to say, but Subaru paint is notoriously thin, and I will say this new front fascia makes it a lot better because my last WRX had a lot of scratches from bugs. So let's move around here to the side. One of the things that I dislike about it is that they took the fog lights away. Now, some people say that these are active and that they feed air into the brakes to cool them, but I've actually heard, and from what I can see, they're not active. If you see here, there's little slits there, but that leads into nothing. So I have no idea why that's there versus a fog light. Another characteristic of the car that I love is obviously the hood scoop, classic Subaru, and I love the headlights. They are adaptive headlights, so when you turn the wheel, they will move with you. Next thing is going around to the side, we'll notice that new for 2018, we have these Yokohama 19-inch wheels and these 6-piston Brembo highlight yellow brake calipers. Now at first I actually did not like the brake calipers, but as I drove the car more, I noticed that the #1 compliment that I received on the car was about the brake calipers, and it started to grow on me. Something that I do absolutely love about the STI is how these fenders kind of flare out, and it gives it an excellent stance. If you can notice all the curves on the car, being a photographer, it looks amazing because you can find the right angles. For example, if you look at the hood right now, you can see all the aesthetics, and it makes it very appealing to the eye, and it gives it that aerodynamic look. Coming around to the back of the STI, the same characteristics carry throughout the car. So for example, once I get behind the car, you'll be able to see how the stance looks wide because they flared the fenders on this car. Another thing that I do love about the car is the quad-tipped exhaust and the classic Subaru wing. The Subaru wing has always been a staple in the STI, and I've actually found some pretty good uses for it. My fiance and I live in an apartment complex where we have to take our trash all the way to the dumpster, and I can tell you I've put at least 10 trash bags on that wing. So hashtag Subaru wing life on that one. So jumping in the 2018 Subaru WRX STI, the first thing that you're going to notice about this car is the seats. The seats have this red contrast leather and Alcantara, and they look phenomenal in my opinion. They're not as heavily bolstered as the Ford Focus RS, but from a day-to-day driving perspective, I actually prefer these seats to the Ford Focus RS. If we come on inside, we can notice a few other things about the STI. For example, the steering wheel is full leather wrapped with perforated leather on the sides, and it has this little red logo with this new ebony gloss piano black finish, which I love, as opposed to what they were using before, which was like this fake plastic carbon fiber. The transmission looks very good. The shifter looks very nice. I like the red contrast stitching. And again, another STI logo. They don't want you to forget that you are in an STI, and they do a good job of that. Now, one of my favorite parts of the car is actually the gauge cluster. When you start the car, the gauge cluster looks amazing. Man, I love those gauges. Now let's go to this infotainment system. We all know that a big weak point for Subaru is their infotainment system. This is a 2018 model and doesn't have Apple CarPlay. That to me is absurd. I don't know why it doesn't have Apple CarPlay. It also doesn't seem responsive. If you click something, there's just a little lag, and you can notice that. It's just overall, it's just a poor infotainment system for the car. If you're gonna pay 40 grand for a car, you expect to have something better. This base model also doesn't have keyless entry, which is a little bit upsetting because you would assume that Subaru could have afforded to put a keyless entry for every model, but that's an upcharge. You do have to get the limited for that. So there's some pros and there's some cons, but overall, if I had to pick an interior that I prefer, I do prefer the STI interior to the RF. So taking off in the 2018 Subaru WRX STI, one of the things that you immediately notice when comparing the Ford Focus RS to the 2018 WRX STI is the fact that if you just blip the throttle in the STI, the RPMs jump so much. It has excellent throttle response, and it is extremely touchy on the accelerator pedal. So it might make it difficult for somebody who hasn't driven the car to drive this car well their first times. For example, I have a lot of friends and I let them drive the car, and I can tell you it's a very bumpy ride. Some people say I'm a risk taker, but you know, people want to see what it's like to drive. And the biggest problem I noticed with people who have never driven the car is two things. One of them is that the throttle is so responsive and that the RPMs jump so quickly, they have a tough time getting out of first gear without bumping. And the second thing is when they're shifting through the gears, oftentimes they don't know which gear they're in because the shifter and the transmission on the STI, first of all, it's a very short throw shifter, and second of all, it's very stiff and it has a very cable-like feel, so sometimes you may think you're in fifth gear when you're actually in fourth. As far as acceleration, the car accelerates really well. Let's do a third gear pull at 40 miles an hour. Man, I love driving this car. It always impresses me. No matter what I do, it puts a smile on my face. You have a lot of people that complain about the power delivery on an STI because it doesn't start to make peak torque until about 4,000 RPMs, and you do feel that turbo lag. But if you know how to drive the car, so keep in mind, I day-to-day drive this car, and you know where the power delivery peaks, you don't really experience that turbo lag. So for example, I just hit it in third gear, and I waited until we were at about 4,000 RPMs to really open the throttle, and there wasn't too much turbo lag. One negative aspect about this car, from a daily driving perspective, is highway driving. Highway driving on the STI is miserable. The car seems to hang at such a high RPM, so if I'm doing, for example, right now about 70 miles per hour on the highway, we're in sixth gear and we're already at 3,000 RPM. There's also a little bit of a drone, which I don't mind because I love the sound of the motor, but when you're talking about a commute that might be over an hour or 2 hours, it gets very annoying. It's not a comfortable ride on the highway. The car seems to hang at such a high RPM. The accelerator is very touchy, and it's just, overall, when comparing it to the Ford Focus RS, which is what we're doing, I would drive the Ford Focus RS on the highway 100 out of 100 times over the STI. Now, city driving is a different story. This car drives really, really well in the city. The fuel economy is absolutely terrible. I average between 15 and 24 miles per gallon, and don't even ask, it fluctuates so much based on so many different things. But as a whole, the fuel economy is terrible, but it drives great. You know, going in the city, stopping at traffic lights, you know, just regular city driving, traffic. I don't feel like I'm in the car that I'm in. And what I mean by that is I don't feel like I'm in some boy racer rally car. I feel like I'm in the Impreza version of the car. If I'm not pushing the car to its limits, it's actually pretty capable of being, I wouldn't say an economy car, but, you know, a simple to drive sports car. Now granted, that comes from day-to-day driving. I drive the car every day. There was a period of time where I had to acclimate to the car, and I did think it was stiff when I first got it, and I did think that the accelerator was very touchy, and there were some bumpy times, but after about 2-3 weeks of driving it, I became accustomed to the driving habits of the car, and man, the car is amazing. The steering feel much better than the RS. The RS has electronic power steering and it adjusts to how you're driving. This still has the old school hydraulic assisted steering, and maybe I'm just getting old, but man, that feels amazing. The car feels timeless and it feels raw, and I always know what's going on with the car. It provides me with really good feedback. Let's do a little acceleration run because we can right now. We're gonna put in second gear at about 30 miles per hour, and it hits. Man, you gotta love that. So yes, we definitely had some lag there, but like I said, I knew it was gonna hit at about 4,000 RPMs, and I can tell you one thing, the power delivery will not upset you. It is such a fun car to drive, and when you top that off with that Subaru Boxer Rumble, man, I love this car. So some of the things that I want to mention about the Ford Focus RS right off the bat. Everything you see on this car is functional versus the Subaru. Like I said, those front fog light replacements are not functional. In this Ford Focus RS, where there are fog lights, right next to the fog lights, there is a space there that feeds air into the brakes so that you can have optimal brake cooling during hard track days. In my opinion, it's little things like that that show me that the Ford engineers took a lot of different things into thought and put them into the car, and it just makes you feel like you're driving something special. The front splitter is aerodynamic, the wing is providing downforce, and just everything about the car serves a purpose. Whereas with the Subaru, some of the things don't. Again, we have awesome blue brake calipers. People always love the colored brake calipers, but to me what's way more impressive about the RS is going to be the tires that come with it. This one comes with Pilot Super Sports, but you can also get Pilot Sport Cup 2s, which those tires are some of the best tires that you can get on the market. And I can tell you, even these Super Sports make the car grip much better than the WRX STI. In my opinion, this is maybe a result of the wheels and a bunch of other things, but primarily the wheels. If Subaru would just throw some Sport Cup 2s on that STI or even a Super Sport, man, I think the car would perform a lot better. Coming around to the back, I love that wing, and it is functional. It does provide downforce, and the rear end just looks so good. Compared to the Focus ST where they have that centered exhaust, man, I really dislike that about the car, whereas with this car we have the classic dual exhaust, and I believe it's 4.5-inch tips. Look at these tips. Absolutely absurd. Moving around to the side of the car, one of the negatives that I will say is that those fenders don't flare. I've heard a lot of other car review guys mention this, and to be honest, I didn't notice it until they did, and now looking at it, it is extremely noticeable. This car could have a better stance from the rear. I don't know what adjustments could be made, but unfortunately the Ford Focus RS is out of production as of 2018, so we won't see any of those, but at least they did what they did because it does look amazing, guys. So hopping in the Ford Focus RS, the first thing you notice in this car is also the seats. Man, are these things bolstered. It makes me feel like, I don't know, like a freaking bear is hugging me, which I guess is a good thing, but I'm not that big of a guy. I'm about 5'10", 150 pounds, and these things hug me. So if I was any bigger, there's a little fear that it might be too tight and too claustrophobic. I do love this logo on the seat. I love the Alcantara and the blue contrast stitching. I think it makes it look extremely appealing. They put the little Recaro badge as well, which lets you know you're driving a special car. So going further into the car, the steering wheel is also amazing. You've got these nice 10-2 grips. You've got this box cut steering wheel at the bottom, and overall you have the perforated leather on the sides, and it just makes the steering wheel feel so nice. It is a little thin for my taste, and I know some other car reviewers have mentioned that. I believe it was Matt Moran, but you know, it's not that bad when you drive it every day. If I had to pick a steering wheel, STI or RS, I would go with STI, but I love the RS steering wheel. The blue contrast stitching, the little RS badge, there's a lot of subtleties that make it feel special. So one of the things that I think that Ford could have fixed with this car is the gauge cluster. The gauge cluster is just overall, it's underwhelming. When I look at the gauge cluster in this car as opposed to the Subaru WRX STI, it's just not, I don't know, like I said, it's underwhelming. So let's take a look at that. So talking about the Ford Focus RS gauges, so they do have that blue background, but to be honest, they look very cheap. They're just extremely underwhelming. I understand that the blue represents the RS badge and the RS history, but I think they could have done a way better job with the gauges. Now, if we go up here to the top, we can see that our boost gauge in the Ford Focus RS, I'm gonna have to render that as almost completely useless. you can kind of get some feedback off of it, but it's pretty inaccurate. It's very slow, and I think they could have done a better job. It's also hard to look at. Now, coming to the infotainment system, much better than the Subaru. The actual touchscreen, it's much more sensitive, so if you just click anything just very lightly, it's very responsive, there's no lag, and this car does have Apple CarPlay. So that is a huge plus, because in my opinion, every car today should have Apple CarPlay. This is actually a 2017, and that STI is a 2018. This car also has keyless entry, and I'm not sure, you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe that every Ford Focus RS comes standard with keyless entry. So another huge plus for Ford. One of the biggest things that I don't hear mentioned too much in car reviews is the sound system. This car has a Sony sound system. I believe it's 10 speakers with a subwoofer, but again, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And man, it is so much better than the STI. I can tell you that daily driving this car, that is a big perk. I do like listening to music, I like listening to podcasts, and it's much easier and much more comfortable to do in this car because of the Apple CarPlay and because of the speakers. My biggest criticism of the interior of this car comes from the fact that I owned a 2013 Ford Focus ST ST2 package. What that means is that I had the Recaro Racing trim inside of it as well. And my biggest comparison, and again criticism, is the fact that the interior has not changed dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. This being a 2017 is 4 years newer than my old Focus ST, and the interior is almost identical. The gauges in the ST were almost identical, the steering wheel was almost identical, and the actual feel of the car was almost identical. Now, they did do some great things with the Apple CarPlay, but I think that Ford could have taken it another step up as far as progression with technology. But you know, for what it is, it's an excellent car. We obviously didn't buy this car because we wanted all this nice technology. This is just an extra perk. Now, that being said, if I had to give a winner to the interior competition, it would be the STI. These seats are just too heavily bolstered. The interior just looks a little bit outdated. Although the tech is better, it just feels more comfortable in the STI. So let's go ahead and take it for a ride. So taking off in the Ford Focus RS. Man, what a blast it is to drive this car. I can tell you I never know which one I want to drive. The first thing you notice about this car is that the throttle is not as touchy. It's not as sensitive. If you blip the throttle in this car, you're not jumping to 4,000 RPMs. You can actually daily drive this car very easily, and anybody who's first time driving this car gets in will be able to take off pretty smooth as long as they know how to drive manual. That being said, this car is very stiff. I know every review about this car has mentioned how stiff it is. Now, in comparison to the STI, I actually would say that the STI feels stiffer off of the get-go. But, and that's a big but, if I put this car in track mode, it's going to stiffen the damping so much in the suspension overall, and even the steering feel, because it does have electronic power steering, that this car will hands down be way stiffer than any setting in that STI. But again, if I just leave it in its normal driving mode, it has 4 modes, it's going to drive better than the STI in my opinion. It's going to be less stiff. I'm not going to feel things as much as I would. There's a couple little things that daily driving this car I actually dislike a lot, and I'm sure you've heard of this, but it has this little auto start stop. I guess Ford thought it was good for fuel efficiency, or maybe they wanted to do it because BMW and Mercedes do it in a lot of cars, but it's really annoying. It's the first time I've seen it in a stick shift car, and basically if you stop at a stoplight and the car thinks it's conducive for fuel efficiency to shut off, it will just shut off. If the car stays shut off for too long, so for example in a drive-through, then the car will turn back on to save battery life. So that's, I don't know, I just think that for what the car is, they could have easily gone without that, and I think it's a pretty stupid feature. Not the end of the world, because the car drives so great. Let's give it a little gas and see how it accelerates. We're gonna put it in sport mode, second gear at about 20 miles per hour, and it has almost no lag. Ready? Oh my God. Man, one thing I can tell you about this car right off the get-go is it is fast. It is so fast, and it will always leave a smile on your face. This car makes peak power from like 2,500 RPMs almost all the way through the rev range. So what you get is almost no turbo lag. It's so much different to drive than the STI when you take into consideration the torque curve and the horsepower curve. So what I mean by that is the STI doesn't make peak torque till about 4,000 RPMs. So when you drive the car, it seems a bit underwhelming unless you're driving it at its limits. So unless you're banging through gears from 4,000 to 7,000 RPMs, the STI doesn't feel that quick. Whereas this Ford Focus RS feels so quick no matter what gear you're in and almost no matter what RPM you're in. And it doesn't have much turbo lag. If I hit it, for example, we're going 40 miles per hour, I'm in third gear at exactly 3,000 RPMs. If I pin it, very little lag and I'm off. And man, I can't even keep going. We're going 75 miles per hour already. The car is absolutely incredible. It is so fast, it's almost stupid. It's got 350 horsepower, 350 pound-foot of torque. Obviously, we know that to the wheels, those numbers will differentiate based on where you are, what dyno you're at, the temperature, and all of that. But the car, day-to-day, driving it just feels so good. It feels so fast, and it is so fun. And one of the best features about this car is highway driving. So contrary to popular belief, although it is pretty stiff, like I said earlier, I do think it's less stiff than the STI, unless you change the modes. And on the highway, it drives so much better than that STI. This car at about 70-75 miles per hour is going to be in 6th gear at about 2,800, 2,700 RPMs. And since that boost is available at a lower RPM, you still have that passing power. So the STI, you might think you compromise that because the STI is hanging at a higher rev range. That's actually not true at all. This car will pass a car just as easily on the highway in 6th gear at 2,500 RPMs because it's going to build that boost quicker. Obviously, you never want to open the throttle at such a high gear, but it's just food for thought. And it just makes it so much more comfortable. There's no drone. It sounds amazing. It's not too loud. It's not too quiet. And the best asset of this car is just the drivability. It is incredible. The transmission, very easy to work with. As I mentioned when I was talking about the STI, some people who haven't driven the STI have a lot of problems with the transmission. It's stiff, it's hard to move around, they don't know what gear they're in, and it just doesn't feel as user-friendly as this transmission. Whereas when I drive this car, anybody could drive it. As long as you know how to drive manual, you can drive the Ford Focus RS. So the car is phenomenal. One thing that I dislike when comparing it to the STI is the electronic power steering. I know that, you know, where we are with technology today, and that's the standard for a lot of sports cars, it's nice, but there's just something about the hydraulic assisted steering that just makes you feel like you're more in tune with the car. And maybe I'm old school, but I will say steering feel I have to give to the STI. And as contradicting as this might sound, even though I give steering feel to the STI, I would give overall, not performance, but overall capability 100% to the RS. You know, I like the hydraulic steering, all that stuff, but the power steering is just better. It feels like it will grip the road at any turn at 100 miles per hour. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but I feel like this car is so capable, I can't even reach its limits if I wanted to. I would have to go to a track to reach its limits. And that might be because of the Pilot Super Sport tires, and I can't even imagine the Sport Cup 2s. But whatever it is, Ford did an amazing job because this car feels so capable. And another feature that I love about this car is that it has a drift mode, which will actually put almost 100% of the power to the rear wheels. And yeah, you'll be able to drift in this all-wheel drive hatchback pretty easily. I have tested the drift mode, and it does work. It also comes standard with a launch control, and that's another feature that's just amazing. I do enjoy tracking cars, and if you've ever been to a drag strip to do a quarter mile, you know that what you read on paper is always different from what you get. You have to understand that the numbers that a lot of these car dealers come up with or manufacturers, pardon me, are from so many tests in the right conditions. So if your car is going to run, you know, let's say a 13-second quarter mile, there's so many variables that go into making that time that you're going to fluctuate between 13, 13.5, maybe even 14. For example, I had a friend, quarter mile, his Ford Focus RS, and he was getting 14s. Now, what I can tell you about driving the WRX STI on a quarter mile track versus the Ford Focus RS, the Ford Focus RS is much easier to do it with because of the launch control. All you have to do is put in launch control, get a good reaction time, bang through the gears, and not mess up, and you're going to get pretty close to what you would read on paper. Whereas the STI is a very difficult car to launch. You have to almost launch it at anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 RPMs depending on your tread wear, and just dump the clutch. And Subaru claims that the clutch can handle it, but it does not feel good when you do it. It just does not feel as smooth as the launch control on this Ford Focus RS. So overall, I love the Ford Focus RS, and I would have to give daily driving, performance driving, and capabilities to the RS. So guys, after driving both of these cars, looking at the interior, the exterior, and talking about my perspective specifically from being able to daily drive both of these, if I had to pick only one car to keep, I would have to go with the Ford Focus RS. And there's a number of reasons why I would make that decision, but ultimately it comes down to how it drives. It performs so well. It handles so well. It's so comfortable. It drives well on the highway. I can adjust the suspension, and it has so many different modes that it just makes driving fun. And there's also some things that you can do in it because it's a hatchback that you can't do in the STI. Subaru, you guys need to make a hatchback STI again. Hatchbacks are amazing. If you own a hatchback, you know how good it is and how much you can use it for. We've shoved TVs in that, couches, and it just makes the car much more practical. So again, there's a bunch of reasons why I pick it, but look, this is a completely opinionated question. The Subaru is absolutely amazing, and I love the Subaru. So, you know, both cars are great, and it's up to you which one you prefer. If you have the opportunity, I would drive both and see for yourself, because I've had plenty of friends drive both, and it's always 50-50. Some of them like the Subaru, and some of them like the RS. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you have anything to say, just leave it in the comments. Thanks a lot, guys.